So good evening and welcome to our 12th edition of Webster Speaks, Dialogues on Race, Equity, and Inclusion. I'm your moderator, Earl McCoy Jr., Regional Recruitment Coordinator here at Webster University. Tonight is a special 90-minute edition and an opportunity to reflect on 2020 and the road ahead. With past panelists, we want to say thank you very much for joining us for tonight's conversation. As always, we ask you to ask questions via Twitter using the hashtag Webster Speaks or send me an email at earlmccoy24@webster.edu. We'll get to as many questions as we can during our live conversation. And now here's our host, Webster University's Chief Diversity Officer, Vincent C. Fuelen.
Thanks, Earl. As always, I want to take this opportunity to, of course, thank our audience for joining us tonight. And I also want to express my gratitude to the members of this audience who made donations in support of Webster University's diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives during the registration process for tonight's Webster Speaks. To say that 2020 has been an eventful year is certainly an understatement. From the pandemic to police brutality to the presidential election, many of us look back with a sense of horror and ahead with a sense of hope. What does the future look like for the workplace, in education, for diversity, and social justice? What can we expect in 2021? Let's talk with guests from previous shows and hear their thoughts and perspectives. Tonight, we have our first ever guest, Dr. Donald M. Suggs, publisher of the St. Louis American. Michael McMillan, president and CEO of the Urban League of Metropolitan St. Louis. Dr. Jameca Woody Cooper, a psychologist and Webster faculty member. Carol Daniel, KMOX News anchor and also a Webster faculty member. Brennae Jackson hopefully will be joining us. She's a current Webster University student and a Suggs scholar. Alisha Sonnier, a Ferguson activist, mental health advocate, and co-founder of the podcast Black Tea. Cbabi Bayoc, a prominent visual artist and activist. Hannah Verity, a 2019 Witnessing Whiteness Webster University cohort participant and director of Webster's Global Development Office. And Valerie Patton, Vice President of Economic Development and Executive Director of St. Louis Business Diversity Initiative and co-leader of the newly launched Greater St. Louis, Inc. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's start first by talking about the Black Lives Matter movement that has accelerated in 2020 with police brutality and the killings of unarmed Black Americans like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and sadly, so many more. Protesting for Black Lives Matter, as well as other causes, has been amplified worldwide and certainly had an impact. Dr. Donald Suggs, publisher of the St. Louis American, you were our first guest. What are your thoughts on how 2020 has played out?
First of all, the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, says that it ain't over yet, 2020, his campaign. Anyway, the New York Times called 2020 a year like no other. Time magazine said that this is the worst year ever, calling 2020 an awful year. But let me remind you, there have been worse years, but not for most of you, not in your lifetimes. For instance, you all were not around for the pandemic in 1918, nor was I, for that matter. And of course, in 1929, the Great Depression, and then the rise of fascism in the 1930s that was only opposed by the West, if you will, in the 1940s. Then there was World War II. So we've seen a lot of tumultuous years in the United States history. We all know 1865, 1945, 1968. So for someone like myself who's lived a very, very long time, you see these things in some kind of perspective. The country's changed mightily, And so the background, when you see things like Black Lives Matter emerge, and you see that there have been previous movements in the United States. What happened very interestingly in the early 1960s, when you saw a really massive change in the country, when historically the country had been built around kind of individualism, and all of a sudden you saw because you saw the confluence of very important movements at the same time. You saw the civil rights movement was emerging. You also saw the anti-war movement against the Vietnam War, and you saw the gay rights movement, and I think feminism was more on the rise. And then, of course, in 1968, which is a very turning point, when you saw horrendous deaths of Dr. King, Bobby Kennedy, and also you saw the ascendancy, the pushback against what had happened in the early 60s by the Republican Party, and that started with Richard Nixon. And so much of what you hear coming out of the mouth of Donald Trump in 2020 or 2016, during his tenure, was predated by Spiro Agnew, almost the same language. So for someone like myself who'd lived a very long time, it's all like deja vu all over again in different forms. So one sees these kind of swings in history. So getting back to 2020, I don't think we'll have a deep understanding of the significance of 2020 in the short term. We don't know the immediate impact. We know what we were experiencing at this time, but it's hard to measure what the impact is going to be over time. I do believe that Black Lives Matter in many ways started in St. Louis with the police killing of Michael Brown 6 years ago. I don't think we would have seen George Floyd in the kind of moment you've seen created in 2020 with a police killing of a Black person in custody. You wouldn't see the brutal federal murder of people on death row. I think the ninth person was murdered just last year. For 17 years, there had been no capital punishment in the federal government. So you see a person like a Donald Trump brings that back to the fore. So in some ways, it's very concerning, very alarming. But to go back to St. Louis and the role it played, it seems to me that movements now, not just having us an extraordinary leader at a particular time in history, but also how important it is to see grassroots movements. And in many ways, the grassroots movement that led to some of the things that one sees around the George Floyd reaction to his killing started very much in North St. Louis. And so I don't think I want to go on much longer because we're going to be ample time for questions, and I don't want to get into a long dissertation here because I know we have lots of folks on the panel, and I'm anxious for the interaction. I want to welcome all. I know most of the people on this panel, and I respect them a great deal, and I'm looking forward to learning. Thank you.
Dr. Suggs, I always appreciate your historical context and helps to kind of frame the conversation. So thank you very much.
The last thing I want to say, though, I think it's also going to shape my comments coming along. Just one data point. 50% of the United States children, people born in the United States under 18, are members of some ethnic minority group. In 1960, the white population was 88.6. The current non-Hispanic white population in the country is 60.7. And so much of what we're going to discuss today is a response to that demographic shift and the kind of terror that's felt by certain segments of our community about that dramatic shift in just 50, 60 years. Sorry, I had data point in.
Thank you very much. Did anyone else, maybe you, Dr. Jameca Woody Cooper, want to weigh in on kind of how, what your thoughts are on how 2020 has played out?
I agree with Dr. Suggs. I also believe that the Black Lives Matter movement started in St. Louis. Because if you go back in time, there wasn't any talk of this as a movement in the phrase until that happened. So, the latter part of 2014 or the summer of 2014. So it really has a really significant role in the whole movement and the trajectory of things. So I think it is important to highlight that. And every time I talk to people all around the country, I make sure that I remind people of that. Some of these issues were there. Most of these issues were there prior to 2014. It's just that the spotlight was not on them.
Thank you. And again, I want to go back. Dr. Cooper, my understanding is that you were recently asked to serve on the American Psychological Association's Committee on Aging, which is a national post. So I'd like to extend a congratulations to you on that. Thank you very much for your leadership around the world nationally for this work. Thank you. Valerie, might you want to weigh in on that question?
Black Lives Matter. It's pretty simple. I do agree with Dr. Suggs and Dr. Cooper on the fact that the movement started here. I mean, even if we go into a historical context, but it really is about Black Lives Matter because of the systematic racism and oppression in this world for years and years. Black Lives Matter. So we wouldn't have an America if it wasn't for Black people. Let us keep it real this evening. But it is really all about Black Lives Matter. And I know that there have been a lot of conversations about, Blue Lives Matter, all lives matter, this life matters. But those groups have not been oppressed or been dealing with systematic racism all their lives. So Black Lives Matter.
Thank you. Alisha, I have to get in there and get you to chime in. We've heard a lot about Ferguson in response to this question. You certainly played a large role as an activist at that time. So what are your thoughts?
Yes, I think that Ferguson was definitely a catalyst for a lot of what we see now. I don't think we heard people saying things like Black Lives Matter or even starting to have serious conversations around police reform, defunding the police. I think all of these things that we see are, results of what we saw in Ferguson in 2014. I think what's very interesting about it is it's not right now, it's not back in 2014 when you would say Black Lives Matter, or you might do some protesting around it. You might be associated with being unemployed. You might be associated with being uneducated. You might be called a troublemaker, and not in a good way. But I think right now, like we're seeing a little bit, at least of a aesthetic shift where you see companies and corporations embracing saying Black Lives Matter. And you see people maybe saying it's okay to wear BLM, like, clothes and shirts. So I definitely think it was started here, that Ferguson was definitely the catalyst for a lot of what we've seen. I think we still have a long way to go as far as doing the work around what Ferguson was about, an 18-year-old Black boy being murdered by police, and police are still murdering Black boys, Black girls, Black transgender people every day. So we still have a lot of work to do around that, and just a lot of work to do around the relationships that police departments have in our communities. And I think right now we're seeing a lot of conversations around what is the role that police officers should play in our communities. How much funding should they get? What other resources should we be investing into? So I think it's definitely something that is still growing and becoming more. And hopefully we can keep pushing to, not just have an aesthetic or a verbal acceptance, but seeing some of the things that we need to see shift in policies and police departments and the culture of America.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to turn this next question to Michael McMillan. Racial unrest in America in 2020 has taken a horrific toll. It has resulted in at least 25 deaths, more than 14,000 arrests, and billions of dollars in damage. How can we begin to sum up this year? What do you think?
Well, first of all, Vincent, it's good to be with you, and it's an honor to be with all of these distinguished panelists, and I thank all of the audience for participating tonight on this very important topic. When you talk about what has happened in 2020 from a racial devastation standpoint, really what you are seeing is things that we have known for centuries being put on full display for the nation and the world once again. in the form of the killing of unarmed African-American men and women across this country. And what has evolved is the ability for people to document it and then be able to show it so that America has to face itself and say that we propose to the world that we are the greatest democracy in the history of human civilization, but we simultaneously will kill our citizens who happen to be of African-American descent, and the people who are responsible for that killing will not be held accountable. And that is where the rage, the anger, the disgust, and the resentment come from, especially among the young people that have led protest movements all across this country and really helped change America. And then when you add to the fact that we also have, of course, the COVID pandemic, where for all of our lives, really the most devastating event that most of us have lived through was 9/11. And where now we're living in an environment where as many people that died on 9/11 are dying every day of COVID. And now we have crossed over 300,000, where more individuals have passed away from COVID than during the entire Vietnam War. And so when you look at, this country and the convergence of a presidential election, and you look at the political climate and the divisiveness and the rhetoric that is coming from leaders in Washington, then you take into account George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, all of the other cases that you have alluded to, and then the economic devastation, and then the manifestation to the nation and the world, how Black people have such horrible health issues and disparities across this country, and then the economic devastation in Black and brown communities, and the fact that individuals that are in the community were not able to work from home because individuals had frontline jobs that were essential, but yet did not make that much money in terms of this essential position. So what it really did was it created a perfect storm for really a scenario where America's had to face itself and figure out what type of nation do we want to be. And of course, the country had the highest turnout in the presidential election that we've ever had in the history of the United States. And it showed that from a non-political standpoint, from a not-for-profit standpoint, but if you look at the Democratic Party having been victorious and the Biden-Harris team being victorious by 7 million plus votes across this country, it did show that enough Americans are supportive of change in a positive direction. But it also showed that 70 plus million people were not. And so it shows the continued divided status of this country and that we have a lot of work to do in order to bring us together, move forward, and fix these systemic racial issues that have plagued this country for 401 years.
Thank you, Michael. You and Dr. Suggs started speaking in terms of, the shift in the way in which Americans kind of see issues of race and how it has shifted and changed over the recent years. A Monmouth University poll shows that in 2015, after Ferguson, about half of Americans believed racial discrimination is a big problem. Today, it is 75%. In 2015, about 1/3 consider Black Americans more likely to encounter police brutality. Today, it's almost 60%. Carol, do these figures seem right to you?
Well, I would have to dig into those figures because usually when we report those figures, there's also a subset of what Democrats think, what Republicans think, what men think. And in this case, I would be curious to know if they surveyed African Americans, what do Black folk think and what do white people think? And there you would find an incredible difference in the thought, in the answer. For instance, the new St. Louis County Police Chief said there's no systemic racism in the St. Louis County Police Department. The Vice President of the United States has said there's no systemic racism in this country. And so clearly there remains a difference of experience and a difference of opinion as to racism and systemic racism in this country. So I don't want to react to the specific numbers you gave me because I know full well that if we were to dig into those numbers, we would probably see 85% of Black people think racism is an issue, and maybe 60% of white people think racism is an issue. So those numbers would sound more likely to be true to me.
Thank you for that, that journalistic lens through which you looked at that question. Thank you so much for that. Alisha, you were on the, one of the first leaders of the Black Lives Matter activism after Michael Brown Jr. was killed here in St. Louis and Ferguson. How do you think history will in fact remember Ferguson?
I think it depends on who's telling the story, to Carol's point. I think that there will be a side of America that remembers Ferguson as like a bunch of hooligans doing a bunch of hoopla, making a bunch of noise about nothing, and as a troublemaking incident, something that caused the divide. And then I think you'll have another group of people that will acknowledge Ferguson as, if anything, maybe just being a flashlight and putting the spotlight on troubles and things that already exist in our society. So I think it'll be remembered in a plethora of ways. I think that no one, the one thing that no matter how you're telling the story, I think no one can deny though, Ferguson's impact on what the conversations we started to have as a country, and the things that you could learn about your colleagues, about your supervisor, about your family, about the person who you thought was your friend, about certain political leaders. It revealed a lot of truths and made us have a lot of tough conversations that, I hate that Black people have to die and be murdered for us to have these conversations. But I think that will be the universal truth of what Ferguson was.
Thank you. Hannah, I know that you were actively involved in protests during Ferguson as well. How do you think history will remember Ferguson?
I definitely think that and hope that change will continue and that history will reflect Ferguson as a turning point. I think that, throughout the last several years, we've seen, and I've seen in white communities, conversation shift, not enough and not enough action happening, but I can see that the paradigm for how people are talking about racial injustice is shifting. And even if we think about the Democratic primaries this year and the conversations and issues that came up on stage in those debates, being issues that were not brought up on those platforms in the past. So I do believe that Ferguson will be seen in history as a point of change, and I hope that change progresses and goes where it needs to go.
Brennae, you are a student over at the university. You're in your second year at Webster University. Can you share with me and with us, your take on this as a student coming of age during all of this? How do you think that history will tell the story?
Well, I think that there are many more positive opinions about the Black Lives Matter movement, because at first, like Alisha said, they thought that the participants were hooligans, and because I made a comment on the last show about the rioting and the looting that was going on and how upset people were about it. And I think that's the main focus of that if you're trying to be negative about it. But otherwise, I think that it's going to be positive because there are more people aligning themselves with the movement. We have way more allies than we did at first in the beginning of it. So I really appreciate that about it.
Thank you. Cbabi, I want to get you in on this. I don't think we've heard from you yet at this point. How much blame can we put at the feet of the outgoing president versus those who actually put him into office in 2016? What do you think about that? So
the country's already split. And as we've been talking about Ferguson, just look at that. It's still a contested statement, argument. It will continue to be. But that's fine. That's how things go. We got Sister Corey in office, and she's birthed from that. So it's still going to stay in the narrative. As far as to blame, folks are going to vote for who they're going to vote for. As an artist, not just art, but even the written word, the spoken word, things are going to be said, statements are going to be made, art and visuals are going to be put out, and people are going to form an opinion and sometimes act based on how they interpret that as truth. So I think the very narrative of Trump going out as he is and the protests getting crazy and out of control now about the vote, which, I mean, I don't know if we've ever seen that. Like, I mean, that's kind of a trip. But I think it's just a matter of people are going to, I think blame is a statement, but I don't know who to blame. I just know people are going to act based on what they feel is true and what they're passionate about, what they've been sold, what they've been told, and, you know, in their heart. So, I mean, all you can do is just own your own narrative and own your own truth and act on that and just have good intention. So if we focus on who's at blame instead of doing what we can to promote change, then, I mean, we're putting our energy in the wrong place.
Appreciate that. So last month, you know, with the election, we saw the first Black and first Asian American woman be elected as vice president, and that is in our Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. We don't have a crystal ball, obviously, but do you think that this election alone will have any kind of healing effect on our divided nation, Alisha?
Well, I'm trying to think healing effect. Maybe if hope can be healing, and I think that seeing Kamala, a Black and Asian woman, become vice president, I think that can give, you know, some hope. I think the healing, we just got to see what they do. We have to see what resources they give to communities. How do they respond to the pandemic? How do they address issues like education? What type of things they do around criminal justice reform? I think right now where we currently are, there may be people that feel like, okay, maybe this country isn't all bad. Like maybe it's not all trash because we were able to, you know, get Trump out of office and get Biden and Kamala in. So I think that might have given people a sense of hope. And I also think that just the election process itself might have given people hope. I mean, like seeing Atlanta, you know, be a Democratic state, something that hasn't happened in so long, in decades. And seeing a lot of other states, you know, you had Indian tribes mobilizing their communities to go out and vote in the polls. So we've seen a certain type of like political engagement that happened that I don't think we haven't seen before, that I know gives me hope, but that doesn't necessarily come from, for me, Biden and Trump. It comes from seeing, okay, people are being engaged and people are still trying to show up and do what they can to create the world we want to live in. But I think for healing, it's just too early in the game. I don't want to give people credit for getting their name on there. I want to read the paper and see what they're writing about and where their commas are. You know, I want to see the content and I want to see what they execute and what they practice and what they deliver. I think it certainly can be healing, depending on what they do. They're obviously in a position to do some things. And I mean, Trump did some things that were so, you know, in terms of certain things he did to transgender communities and LGBT communities and rolling back rights in certain ways and attempting to defund HBCUs. I think that, you know, they're definitely in a position where there's some things he did that they definitely won't do. But I just think we need a little bit more time to use the word healing. I think what is healing is seeing people's response and engagement. And we'll have to see what actions and executions the president and vice president are able to do moving forward.
Vincent, can I add to that
Please.
To get to healing, we have to go through grief in this nation. And sadly, an election of these two, I would hope, would address the grief. Because there are those who felt that President Trump never really spoke to the hurt, just the sheer hurt that the nation felt from losing people, from not being able to go to funerals, from not being able to, kids not being able to spend time with their friends and seeing businesses go under, that there's been so much pain that the nation has endured and continues to endure, that to think that a president and a vice president can bring us to healing is a legitimate hope to have. But I hope that they are aware, and I think that they are, that we have to address the grief that this nation continues to endure and has not even really been able to experience. Because for people to not be able to bury loved ones, the grief process is stunted. So their election for many, clearly for many, is a positive move in the right direction. But for this nation to heal, it is going to take a completely different process from a lot of different people than just the president and the vice president elect.
Thank you. Anybody else want to get in on that?
Well, my view is I think, we should maybe look at these things from a little broader perspective. I know we're in a moment and there's something very immediate about how our feelings and all that, but what we're really talking about is, what kind of impact does elected politics have on public policy and the direction the country is going to go in? So I think if we're going to have a serious discussion about that, we're going to have to be, for a moment, a little bit dispassionate and try to understand where we are now in the United States. I pointed out the numbers about the huge demographic shift you see. Also, there are other shifts in the world, globally. The world is not what it was in 1970. When China was a backward, struggling nation, 1978, when they adopted a market economy. So now they're the second largest economic power in the world. The United States had the third largest population in the world, but much, much larger than the United States are both China and India. And so what happens in the United States in so many ways is very much impacted by what other forces that are going on in the world today. We talk about things like income disparity and unemployment. All those things are more than simply a matter of political party decisions. They have to do with the whole shift in the global economy now, where the blue collar jobs that existed at one time, the whole issue of free trade, all of those things impact as much as grassroots organizing or what our particular views are. The numbers I pointed out to you earlier tell you something that it's most disturbing, I would say, for people on the side on the right. And that is the fact that this is a multiracial country de facto, whether they like it or not. They can build the highest walls, the history of mankind, and the country's still multiracial. The question is how you're going to deal with that. And when we look at politics, we look at what's happened in the last election. You saw the Democratic Party prevail at the national level. Yes, the Democratic candidate won by 7 million votes, but 5 million of those votes came out of California, which means the rest of the country, they only won by 2 million votes. And if you drove that down to 5 or 6 swing states, that number's even smaller. So there's a huge group of pushing back against this new reality, the new reality of the demographic shift, the new reality of the changes in the economy in the world today that don't lend themselves to ideology. I mean, manufacturing, not what it was. I grew up in a factory town, and the largest factories there hired about 30,000 people, and now that same number is 3. In the city of St. Louis in 1970, the anchor institution in St. Louis from an economics point of view was McDonnell Douglas. There were thousands of African Americans who had jobs, good paying jobs at both McDonnell Douglas at that time was not Boeing for you younger people. And they hired 40,000 people. And the supplier industries hired 20,000 people. Boeing now hires 13,000 people. And we also similarly looked at what was happening in the automobile assembly world. That means African Americans with less than a high school education could have a good living wage job, not great skills. Those jobs just do not exist anymore. That's impact on social policy. That's impact on our politics. That impacts on lots. When I grew up, there was rigid segregation. When I first moved to St. Louis, Black folks did not have access to public accommodations. Now Black folks, if you're not placed by it in the same way, like we were 60, 70 years ago, they can live wherever there are resources. I'm not saying it's going to be friendly, but you're not placed by it in the same way. So I'm introducing a larger context for some of this discussion, because otherwise we will not really be getting to the heart of the matter. The Democratic Party coalition can do certain things for dealing with some of the problems we have to deal with, but that's not the solution. There's some other factors going on that we have to take into consideration when we come up with a strategy about how we're going to move forward. Political parties can do certain things, and we must push them to do all those things that they can do. However, it is futile to expect political parties to do things that you cannot do. And may for a moment make a reference for you all. In the United States, there's a very small minority, small ethnic group, the Jewish community. And the way one becomes aware of and familiar with and indoctrinated into or understand the narrative about Judaism is not through public schools. The Jewish community takes on the responsibility of making certain that Jewishness is inculcated in their population through their own institutions. And so some of us since the 1960s have been urging Black people to understand some of the things you need to understand about your history and about politics and about all those things that have impacted you in your daily lives is something you're going to have to learn inside your own community. So the narratives in our churches, religious narratives in our churches, the moral messaging is not going to come from the Democratic Party. I don't care if it's Kamala or Barack Obama, it's not going to come from our political leaders because that's just not the nature of what political parties do in a society like the United States where you are still a minority. So I'm going on and on, but I'm trying to urge you to think in larger terms about the impact of what some of these changes mean for a society, for a marginalized group like so many of us are, as we come up with strategies, as we try to move forward. Yes, we will have to be activists, but yet that activism has to be dealt with a deeper understanding of some of the other factors that impact why we get a Donald Trump, why we get Reagan Democrats. I mean, there are reasons for that. And we need to have a deeper understanding of that if we're going to come up with strategies that are going to make a difference over the next 5, 10 years. I'm sorry to go on and on, but you understand what I'm trying to say to you?
For sure. We
about
need
context.
Thinking context and thinking of the how, right, that has led us to where we are today, right? That's the historical piece of that. And then, taking the lessons learned from those historical moments to help kind of shape and frame how we think about moving forward, right?
I'm saying more than that. I'm saying that we ought to study what happened in the 30s in Germany and why fascism comes. How a man who's in a fringe party has 3% of the vote, and all of a sudden he becomes the leader of the Third Reich, and he ruled for 12 years. I mean, in Germany, which was an advanced society, where Jews were not unlike African Americans who've been buried on the fringes of our society, on the fringes of our economy. The Jews in Germany were at the highest ranks in, you name it, finance, in the arts, in education, in science. Hello, Einstein, okay, Freud. And yet, look what happened. The fascists came into power. So I'm suggesting to you what you see with Donald Trump, you need a deeper understanding what's happening with Donald Trump. It's not just this grifting man from New York, who is boorish and filthy as an individual, and yet he leads a political party. How does he come to power like that? He's not a man of any deep kind of ideological depth. I mean, he didn't have any of that because he is able to mine what is deep inside so much of the American society, and they are aggrieved. And he speaks to their grievances. It's a tribal struggle, and he speaks. He may be flawed while the evangelicals embrace him, but he's our guy.
Right.
He's our guy. And so that's what you're faced with now. It's not just this foul person, it is a graceless man, with no any of that. And yet there he is. He controls a political party in the United. I'm sorry. See, I told you I'd go on and on.
Well, and you're making me think too, Dr. Suggs.
I don't
Vincent.
like to rant, but I have to make it clear. We don't want these superficial conversations in some way very disappointing for me. I understand young people because when I was a young person, I'm sorry, young people. This guy, I was a young person. I mean, I had no passion. All I want was the barricades. You show me this is offensive to me. I want to fight it. And I look around and say, maybe I better be a little more smart. And maybe more, and that comes with age, and I don't want, I don't want you all to be just what you said. I don't want you to cut back on that. But I do think we have to understand this is a huge problem. And for a moment, I want to just address the handle. We can't make a move. I mean, we talked about Black women. I love my Black women, my mama. They were right there. Guess what? If you didn't have the white people who were aligned for whatever reasons with you and your progressive thinking. And so I know what happens inside the progressive movement that we all, at least people like myself, have embraced all my life, is that we should not shun the power of the religious narrative and moral messages. Often it's fashionable among intellectuals to talk about them, in kind of very disrespectful or dismissive terms. We can't, look, if King's not religious, he doesn't have a movement. I'm sorry.
Carol, you wanted to say something?
Mute. Okay, I'm gone.
Carol, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say when he spoke to that the president is speaking to the grievances of a certain sector of society, it made me wonder that when Black people issue our grievances, we have generally taken them to the courthouse. We have generally taken them to politicians. And what I hear Dr. Suggs saying is that there is a deeper move afoot, and we have to be about a deeper move to ensure real power. Because when you think about what happened to the Jewish community at the hands of one man who whipped people into a frenzy, we see something similar. People have been whipped into a frenzy. But when we as Black people are mad, and righteously so, we never get to frenzy stage where we are moving mountains and moving institutions. Certainly we've done it. I mean, I live where I live. I have a job. I'm in the upper so-and-so percent. But we have moved institutions. But what I hear Dr. Suggs saying is a much deeper move, that why can't we go into East St. Louis and buy up that entire city? There is enough economic ability and resource to do that. Where is our frenzy to go in and do that? Are we waiting on someone? We often do that. We wait on someone else to do those kinds of things. So Dr. Suggs got me going. I love it when he gets going.
Anyone else gotten going out there? Valerie, what are you thinking? Jameca, Hannah?
I just love and adore both Dr. Suggs and Carol. And I was on a call earlier today. Let's talk about frenzy. And at the end of the call, as you know, we're starting a new organization, Greater St. Louis Inc. And there's a STL 2030 jobs plan, which is an economic inclusion growth plan for our region. But the person asked me, and I'm not calling any names tonight, but somebody else on this call was in that meeting, said to me, is there anything I was afraid of? If there was anything that, was kind of going to keep me up at night about it. And I took off my corporate hat and said, my English is getting ready not to be good. And I am not scared. So bring it. Whatever you got, bring it. Because to Carol's point, I've been appointed at this place and this time to do the work that needs to be done. So I can't be scared at the end of the day. I got to do the work. And of course, my work is for the people, especially my people. So at the end of the day, I get a chance. They let me sit at the table. So let's go back 400 years. They let me sit at the table. So I'm going to use my frenzy to do the work that needs to be done, to be the voice of my people. No, I don't know what it's like to be poor. I don't know what it's like to miss a meal. Oh, yes, I am privileged. But I see the lack of hope. I see the despair every day. So now that I've been able to have this place, I need to use it. And I know my sister Carol is behind me, and my brother Mike is behind me. And I know Dr. Suggs is behind me because he's been sitting in the rooms during all of this. But we got to get fire up under us to do what we have to do for us. We can't depend on anybody else to do it for us. And it is the story of Jewish people and many other indigenous people in this country. You see what they did to move themselves forward. You know, it's like we get to a point and we just stop. We like, okay, I don't know what I'm gonna do, but we got to get past that stopping to get things done. And we do. I'm with you, Kara. I don't know why we can't buy up North St. Louis either. You know, why can't we build up? I talked to a Black real estate developer last night. You know, so we got the talent, you know, we got the tools, and the people that came before us made a way out of no way. And I don't know why we trying to make it something different. So do we need every dollar? No. Let's use those skills and talents, you know, that we have been so blessed and gifted with, and do the thing. Okay, I'm getting like Dr. Suggs.
I want to bring in Michael on this. A lot of what we're talking about is, I think, greatly connects to the good work that you're doing, Michael, in terms of how do we also then represent many of the voices and individuals that you and your organization advocate on behalf regularly.
No, absolutely. And, you know, what Valerie just said is very key. You know, sitting here right now on this Zoom call at the corner of Martin Luther King and Kings Highway in the heart of North St. Louis, and looking at the devastation of areas that have vacant buildings, vacant lots, vacant and abandoned businesses, and looking at all of the opportunity that is here that is untapped. Going back to what Carol said about East St. Louis, it could be East St. Louis, it could be North St. Louis, it could be North County. There are so many areas that are in need of economic development and infusion. And we as a community, we as a people, we as those of us that are concerned about the development of the city and the region have to be willing to do any and everything that we can to improve this area by helping personally and professionally and using our spheres of influence in both of those worlds to try to bring resources to people that need it the most. When you look at individuals right now, sadly, because of the pandemic, individuals are in a survival mode, which is why, quite frankly, we have pivoted at the Urban League to help people with their basic needs. How do you get food? How do you get clothing? How do you get PPE materials? How do you get rent, mortgage, utilities, and things of that nature just to get through this? Then once you do that, why do we not then try to help you get back to being sufficient so that you can get a job, that you can have a career again, and that you can become a homeowner, you can live the American dream, but also simultaneously for the individuals that lost jobs that might now decide that they want to become an entrepreneur, we have our Women's Business Center. And we have an opportunity to take young and women of any age and give them the entrepreneurial skills to become their own boss so that they can have businesses and rebuild this community. Because one of the problems that we have is there has been so much disinvestment in our areas that you recently heard in the past couple of years that the city had reinitiated the Dollar Home program so that you could get a home in a depressed area that's owned by the city for $1. And the sad part about the economics of redlining, discrimination, and institutional racism that have happened in this city for decades is that if you take that home for $1 in the areas that they are, and then you spend $50,000 perhaps to renovate it completely and then live in it, in many cases, it will not even appraise for the $50,000 that you spent on it to have it to be habitable for you and your family. And so that's why you see so many vacant and abandoned properties. And so then you have an increase in poverty, an increase in crime, an increase in a perception of neighborhoods not being worthy of you being able to live there. And then you end up with situations where with a decreased population, you don't have enough students for schools. And so we all recently heard, of course, where the public schools has had to propose that they would need to close 11 schools or so because of a lack of population. So now you have these institutions in the community that they then become vacant, abandoned, derelict property. So it is a cycle of disinvestment that's been going on for decades. And all of us have to get involved in terms of making it our priority personally and professionally to figure out how we can fix it. That's why I'm so incredibly happy that Val has recently been appointed to this new position in charge of not only the foundation, but diversity, inclusion, and equity for the regional economic development engine and civic leadership, to be that voice, to be that person at the table, to talk about how we can bring these resources to the Black community, because we've been studied, we've been prodded, we've been poked, we've been discussed, and now it's time for action. And we need some concrete, substantive things to be done where people can see what is going to be done and what is needed to be done long term. And it can't just be a one-hit wonder. You know, as I joke with them, this can't be a Milli Vanilli. This needs to be Diana Ross. It needs to be a whole career, because you can't just do one project. NGA is not going to redo all of North St. Louis. You can't just do one thing. It has to be a collective, and it has to be from different spaces. And you have to work with a variety of different places to do these deals, because they're very difficult, because they require a lot of subsidy and a lot of investment.
Thank you. Anybody else want to get in on that one?
I just wanted to say something, taking it back to Dr. Suggs and his comparison and history of Nazi Germany. And I think it's really important to say that not only was it Hitler himself who made all of this happen, but it was those around him, those who were complicit in the system, those who did not speak up, those who did not interrupt, that also allowed what happened to the Jewish community in Nazi Germany to happen. And so I see that so much with Trump and with white people and the Republican Party, particularly, of people just going along for their own gain, or because they just want to mind their own business, and not speaking up and standing up with regard to what's going on. So I think that is really important to state.
So Hannah, I appreciate that, because during your show, we had a great conversation about white allyship, right? And what that actually is about. You know, is there a way for you to not speak on behalf of all white people, right? But from your perspective, from your role, what do you think that you can do concretely to really show up for social justice and to help move this needle?
Yeah, so I mean, I think about the things that in myself, what I can do, and also ways that other white people can show up. I see it sort of as two things. There is a necessity, if we are really interested in dismantling these systems of oppression, to do the internal work, which means to be able to deconstruct these ideas and myths about our white identity and the construction of the place of superiority of whiteness in our culture, really in order to address the racial biases and attitudes that we hold and that we project because it's baked into our system. So I think that internal work is necessary, doing the work to learn the history of oppression in the United States and to learn about the racist systems and policies that were intentionally built, and to learn about how we perpetuate those, listening to Black and Brown voices and perspectives, and being able to really dig into our unique identities. So for example, for myself, thinking about the ways that I show up as a white woman and the history and legacy that I bring with me in that, thinking about the ways that I show up as a white educator, as a white person working in international education. And as I begin to look specifically at those identities and the history that I bring with me, I can then look to address and make sure that I am not perpetuating those same ideas and that racism that has happened historically and continues to happen within those identities. And I think, there's that internal work, and then there's a necessity to take action and engage in external work, whether that be in your workplace, so looking, you know, where you have influence, thinking about ways that you can shift policies or ways that you operate in your workplace. Maybe it's speaking to family members and taking a risk to speak up. You know, I think those are ways that white people have to show up to really begin to dismantle these systems.
Thanks for that. Alisha, you wanted to say something, I believe, earlier?
Man, there are so many points made. So earlier, I think what Donald and Curl were talking about like the fire and people feeling, taking more of a drive and ambition to do things in our own community. Well, one, I think right now, Black women out of any racial group are the fastest group of women as far as increasing in ownership, in business ownership out of any racial group. Also that some of what we were talking about earlier about like since 2007, the number of firms owned by Black women have grown by 164%. This year between May and July, thanks to like things like the Black Lives Matter movement and popular like hashtags, we've seen a huge increase as far as the support for Black businesses that we've had. I think it jumped up by 7,000%, the support that was going to those businesses. So I just want to say that there are people in our communities right now that do feel that fire. I know people actively right now. I just interviewed somebody named Gabrielle Williams, who's been in real estate for 18 months and has bought over 6 properties and is coaching over 18 clients, and she's buying properties on the north side. I know somebody else, Aaron Williams, he's the chair of an organization called Young Friends of the Ville, and they're doing amazing things on the north side of the community and helping people take a sense and pride in their community. So our community is certainly, we're getting better and better at supporting our own businesses, building our own institutions. But I think in reference to part of what was mentioned earlier, like with the Holocaust and Hitler, something that also happened with the Holocaust is that Germans did receive reparations. Germany paid 450 million marks to the World Jewish Congress, which is basically a federation of Jewish communities and organizations, which is equivalent to $1 billion today. So I'll be curious to see if our communities receive those type of reparations for the over 300 years that we spent in slavery and then added segregation and so on and so forth, what our communities could do with that too. So I'm just pointing that out to say, and then on the flip side, you have a situation where before the pandemic, 58% of Black businesses were in financial distress. So that's not even post. So just saying all that to say, like, I definitely think that there is a fire and a drive in our community. And I know people actively, I mean, some of my friends, like all what they talk about is buying properties and improving their credit. People were quick to say, is that Black owned when we're going out to brunch or going out to dinner? So I do think that people are having that drive and having that passion, but there are we all know that when things happen in this country, it hits everybody and it hits Black people disproportionately. So our businesses, our lands, our properties, whatever. And it certainly doesn't help when we have, a place like St. Louis, well, they'll tell you that, we have less than 3% of our budget going to human services, but we can find $1 billion for a stadium, but we can find $51 million for a trolley that goes 2.2 miles and never works. So I think that's part of why people are applying a lot of political pressure and just calling out that like type of, hypocrisy. Like we don't have money to pay for mental health services and pay for education, but we can find $1 billion for a stadium and $51 million for a trolley. But on the flip side, I think our communities are doing what we can, and we're seeing that grow and get better in terms of owning our economic power and building that out.
Excellent. You brought up a couple of things I'd like to maybe transition us onto from this conversation about the pandemic, coronavirus, COVID-19. You talked a lot about some of just the health piece. And so with that, I'd like to point out that Black Americans are dying from COVID-19 at 3 times the rate of whites. And they're very distrustful at this point around this vaccine because of not only history around the Tuskegee syphilis experiments from 1932 through 1972, but also because of today's just simple inequities in healthcare. And so Dr. Woody Cooper, I'd like for you to maybe start us off on this conversation around mental health and the disparities around health period for people of color.
Well, one of the things we've all witnessed this year is, of course, COVID-19 and how it started off. You know, we thought this would be something that would be quick and over, and then we get back to our lives, and it's lasted, 9 months, 9 to 10 months already. So what we were able to see from COVID-19 and this pandemic is the disproportionate amount of racial and ethnic minorities that don't have the same opportunities for healthcare in this country. And then, of course, what we were able to see from racism with the George Floyd incidents is that there are people, a good pocket of people in this country who live a totally different life, and they are brutalized by police, they're followed, they're harassed, they don't have the same opportunities. So we were able to put the spotlight really on systemic racism. What Carol Daniels said a minute ago is that people have said already that it doesn't exist, right? And those of us who live in it every day know good and well that it exists, and it's been existing for many, for 400 years, roughly. So we've been able to see that this year. And I think, in my opinion, what has been able to happen is that because people were, we had the stay-at-home orders and we were all restricted to our homes, we were pretty much forced to only interact with the people in our homes and watch TV all day, read books or what have you. And so because people were stuck in the house, they were forced to really not just look at the news, but maybe digest what had been going on. So it wasn't just the George Floyd. Remember, it was Ahmaud Arbery before that. It was Breonna Taylor all around that. And it made people focus on, you know what, this is really an issue. But for those of us who've lived it, we've known for many times, many generations, and you've heard stories from your parents about how long this has gone on. So we were really taking a greater look, a more significant look at both the pandemic of racism and the pandemic of COVID-19. So one of the things that I think is important is that I was reading earlier that the Chinese word for crisis is composed of two different characters. And one of the characters stands for danger and one stands for opportunity. And this is the word crisis. This is where we are right now with the pandemic. And if you look at what that means, it means that you ought to play it safe, of course, but you also have the opportunity to do something different. And that is what we have now with both pandemics. We have the opportunity to do something different. What the different is, I guess soon will tell. Like, we have different elected officials that hopefully will do something different about the pandemic of COVID-19. Hopefully they will also do something about police brutality and some of the other discriminatory policies that we have across the country. But I will say this, I'm gonna jump back to something someone said earlier about the frenzy, Dr. Suggs and Carol. I grew up in Arkansas, in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, which a lot of people may know. It is a HBCU in the town I grew up in, University of Arkansas, Pine Bluff. I grew up in that town. I went to college in Jackson, Mississippi at HBCU, which is Tougaloo College. The college that I went to was really one of the founding elements as far as civil rights in Mississippi. So coming from that, I came to Mizzou for graduate school, and then I ended up in St. Louis. The last thing that I thought that we would be dealing with in St. Louis is this amount of segregation. When you leave Arkansas and Mississippi, you never expect to see those levels of discrimination and oppression until I got to St. Louis. And what I've seen since I've been in St. Louis for 20 years really rivals a lot of the things I've seen in the backwoods of Mississippi. It just looks a little bit different here. So one of the things I hope that happens from this is that the spotlight stays on and that the frenzy stays heightened, because there has to be a frenzy. There has to be, lives have to be lost. This is a struggle, and this is what it's going to take for people. So I think we have to get to a place where we're not just wanting to protest. We have to be ready to do some other things that may not be socially acceptable, but it's going to take that for times to really change and for this equality to really exist in the ways that we want it to.
Thank you for that. I'd like to maybe shift down with that hope piece there to Brennae. And Brennae, as we think in terms of your generation, you're sitting here with a bunch of old folks right now, right? And what Val said, wait a minute. But what where are you? Where are you and your peers right now in all of this? And what are you all thinking? What are you feeling right now? What you talk about mental health? Are there concerns that you and your peers are experiencing? Are you all seeking out help? Are you all discussing it? What can we do to also support you?
So at the beginning of this pandemic, I found myself really depressed, but then I got out of it really quickly. And then I noticed how the pandemic affected everyone around me. And then school started back, and that made it no better. I see my 6-year-old little cousin like crying about going into virtual school. She's depressed about it. Everyone's failing around me. That's just my personal story. And that I'm sure that's the story of everyone else, like going in SOPS schools too as well. But I say all this to say, like me personally, I reached out to my community and I was like, hey, if y'all kids need tutoring, I can do it. I can do it. I can help y'all. Call me on Zoom, call me on FaceTime. I can meet y'all one-on-one, 6 feet apart, socially distanced. I'm here to help because I don't like saying all that. And, I said, I'm here to be a teacher and an educator, an ear, a friend, anything, because I just want to help, because I do not like seeing my people stressed, depressed, any of that. So, and also it makes it better that I'm an education major. So it's already my passion. So it's already what I want to do. But my peers, we're really just collaborating, like you guys said, like being activists and getting the fire up under us, because it took a really long time for all of this to brew. Like I've been sitting on this idea for a while, but it just came to light because me seeing all of this dread with my own 2 eyes. So I personally took action, and I gathered some people with me so we can shake some stuff up in this area, because I can't stand to see it. I would hate for opportunities to be lost just because of a pandemic. I know that sounds bad to say, but it's like you gotta trudge through it,
Specifically though, what is it that you and your friends are doing to kind of work your way through this? You say you're showing up for your people. You've offered tutoring, but are you and your friends, what else are you all doing?
We're really just, being mental health advocates. Like if I see someone out, social media, for example, is one, because I'm really heavy on social media. I always try to ask people, do they need help or anything? Like, do they need someone to talk to? Because, social media is a place for venting for people of my age group. Like they'll go in there and complain, or, oh, well, it's me. And I'll try to help and give them some words of encouragement, or try to assist them in any way that I can. And my friends, they're all really, really smart and really, really creative and really nice. And we all have I want to say psychology backgrounds. It's not specific, but it's like we already know what's going on with it. So we can apply those things in real life to help people. But yeah, it's really just, it's outreach. That's mainly the main thing, is outreach.
And I think, I'm looking at Dr. Woody Cooper shaking her head, in this world, that's what we need right now. We need to be able to check on one another, right? And
that's one of the biggest things that has been a positive that's come from the pandemic in the African-American community. More people are considering therapy and counseling as an option now that would have never considered it probably 1 year ago. So that's a good thing, because it's, we have a stigma of mental health in our community about, oh, it makes you weak. You shouldn't be weak. Just get over it. And I think now in 2020, finally, people are okay with it. And I think the younger generation is really at the forefront of that. They really see mental health and self-care as a very positive thing. And they all share that belief. So Generation X is coming along. Baby boomers are coming along as far as considering therapy. So I think it's been a good thing. I don't know how long it will last after COVID, but I hope it does.
I'd like to maybe, we talked about this idea of self-care. We talked about this idea of therapy. Art is one of those ways, I think, in many ways of expression and in ways of providing some therapy. Cbabi, you want to speak some to maybe what you're seeing through your art? I know you're in schools. I know you're working with youth. I know you're doing your own projects. I know that you're a dad. How is art kind of helping in ways in which, you know, you're touching and in ways in which you're seeing?
Well, first I'll be personal. I mean, art definitely therapy for me. And just like Dr. Cooper was saying, like, I just texted my therapist on BetterHelp. Like, she's been dope. She's in St. Charles. So yes, I'm an advocate as well. I'm at a school now in Webster, and just basic. I'm there working on a mural, and there's some kids there in the school, but there are those who are at home quarantining. And even the teacher telling me, even the bright spot in their day was being able to Zoom and talk to me while I'm at their school doing a mural, because they're bummed out that they can't be there, whether or not they'll talk to me in person or not, but just the fact that they feel like they're missing something and seeing something. I have done some classes online, some art classes, hanging out with kids. But yeah, I mean, art is always therapeutic, but I can't necessarily speak on art therapy because that's a whole something else. But just touching on some of the other things that have been mentioned, like Alisha mentioned, Gabby, Gabby and her husband Brandon, they're on Instagram constantly promoting.
Real Estate Bay.
Huh?
Real Estate Bay.
Yeah. So they're constantly promoting that, and even him with his hip hop and teaching, and I mean, both of them just as a team, they've been dope online. And when you were asking young Miss Jackson about what her and her youth are doing, but Dr. Suggs was saying everything in perspective. Like, while I'm at the school painting, I was listening to a book on Black fortunes, talking about Sister Malone and them and folks that out of slavery came through. Sister said the frenzy, hope it lasts, but I mean, we know it's not going to. But what we can do is pivot. Like she said, the numbers are up on people supporting Black businesses. Like, I tell people, there's a lot of craziness going on in the world, but in some levels and degrees, it's really good to be a Black creative right now. It's really good to be in Black business and doing your business well, because you're sought after. But we got to learn that it's not going to last. And not leeching off of it, but just while people are supporting us, we got to take that and pivot it and put it back into our community, back into our youth. And I mean, because also they're watching us on how we handle all this. So we falling apart. We can't expect them to keep it together. My kids, two of my daughter who go to Chicago, she goes to college in Chicago, but right now because of all this, she's here. So she's hating that. My sons, one's completely virtual and one goes in a little bit. Everybody handles it differently. But I think, being around family, being around friends, Zoom may bum us up, but right now that's what we got. But I think it's super encouraging that, she's reaching out. There are a lot of other Miss Jacksons out here that are doing good stuff. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of good happening, but just to round it all the way back around to the very beginning of it, therapy has just been huge on me on helping me be positive in front of my own kids. Because we just, as an artist, we are idealistic in what we put out and what we want to see. We don't make the change, but we can promote the image that we want to see be changed. So, I mean, that also comes with us as people. I mean, I feel like my career is just a reflection of man. I just happen to use paint more than I use my voice. I don't even know what I just said, but there you go.
It was good.
It was good. And speaking of Black-owned businesses, there is Sweet Arts located just immediately north of Tower Grove Park.
Yep.
Give a quick shout out there for me. Take it there.
I mean, and Gabby and Brandon live up the street. But Black-owned business, vegan. I mean, you can't go in right now, but my art's hung there for the past 10 years. But Ray Bayoc is running Sweet Art, and my daughter, my son work there. A lot of support from all over, Fenton, everywhere. So it's definitely an example of community support with what is happening over there with the business. So I'm very proud of what's happening at Sweet Art.
great curbside pickup for great sandwiches as well as cupcakes. My favorite cupcakes come from there. And they're doing a great job of curbside there. I do have a question here from
sweet potato pie. My favorite sweet potato pie is from
the Bell Hooks nachos. Mm.
Mm. All kinds of shout outs over there. Hannah, there was a question sent to us earlier that asks you, how has the pandemic affected international student enrollment at Webster, locally and abroad?
Yeah, so we've definitely seen a decrease in international enrollment this fall as it relates to the previous fall. I think in looking at numbers recently, we're at about 64% in our US domestic sites in relation to the number of international students we had in fall 2019 to fall 2020. So we are definitely have seen due to the pandemic a decrease in international students. But I would say that while it's been more drastic this past year due to the pandemic, we've actually seen over the last 4 years a decrease in international students, not only at Webster, but across all higher ed institutions within the US. And a lot of that ties back to the Trump administration when he came in, and the anti-immigrant rhetoric that he used, the banning of the entry of people from primarily Muslim countries, that has also assisted in that decrease in international students coming to the US. I was recently talking with one of a colleague at our Webster Ghana campus, and she's worked in education, higher education in Ghana for like 20 years, and she said she's never seen or heard students primarily want to come to study in the US, and over this past year that has shifted, and she's heard students say they don't want to come to the US. Part of that is the response to the pandemic and the numbers that you're seeing in the US. And then part of that is a response to the rhetoric about international students and immigrants within the US and not feeling welcome.
Thanks. So I'd like for us to, we're coming close on the end here. What's the hopeful note for us on which to end? I'd like for each of you to maybe tell us your wish for the new year as it relates to social justice and racial justice. We'll start with you, Cbabi.
I would just say that I will go, I was reading over the notes of what was going to be asked and said, and I thought about the question, artists having statements, things to be said, how they can avoid it, having pushback and this, that, and the other. I would just say going forward with what all is happening and the narrative and what we want to see change. I think from speaking as an artist, not for artists, but as an artist, that we just have to commit to what we believe needs to be seen and do it and expect pushback, because if we're pushing against something, resistance should be natural and normal and expected, but it still has to be seen. So I'm very optimistic about people taking more action. I'm not going to speak on the rate of which is going to happen in this, that, and the other, but I don't see people giving up or laying down. I'm very inspired by people's dedication to change.
Thank you. Hannah?
We saw a lot more white people speaking up after the killing of George Floyd in this summer, and I hope to see continued commitment and work in dismantling racism among white people, that it's wasn't just for show, but that we are invested in that change. And then I will also say I'm interested and hopeful in seeing we will have a new mayor in the city of St. Louis. And so hopeful that we will have a mayor who takes the approach to address a lot of these issues.
Thank you. Dr. Woody Cooper?
Hope for 2021 is that we keep applying pressure where pressure is needed, and that we don't let up and get comfortable with the changes that we might see occur over the next couple of months. I want us to stay really focused and diligent on what needs to happen in order for this true racial equality to ever really exist in this country. And I also want to make sure that people continue to seek out therapists and counselors in the area for mental health, especially those of color. We do have some psychologists and counselors and social workers in St. Louis that are of color, but not nearly enough to support the needs in this area. But you do have options such as online. So I just want us to also focus on empowering each other and keep each other lifted up, because this is not going to be a short fight. It's a long and weary fight, and one that I might not see in my lifetime, but we have to be up for the challenge.
Thank you. Brennae?
My main hope is that more money or attention is paid to our school systems here in the city. That's really what I hope for, because the closing of the 11 SLPS schools, I read that and I was like, are you kidding? Like, as if there's not already a plethora of problems going on in that system. You're gonna close down the schools? Okay, but I just hope that, you know, there's a little more love and care and attention given to those facilities and those students, the faculty, just the whole nine. So.
Thank you. Alisha?
I think that my hope for 2021 is, well, one, like, honestly, I feel really honored to be on a panel with all of you all today. Like, just looking at my screen right now, honestly brings me a little hope to see all of us, different people, different backgrounds in different industries, but kind of with a similar goal and a similar agenda, and able to come together and have a conversation and doing work in our own ways to move it forward. Like, that honestly brings me hope, whether you're talking about from journalism or as a student or as a CEO of a nonprofit, or Hannah, or even you, Vincent, or editor Donald. That brings me a lot of hope. I think that if we can reflect what we see right now, which is all of us in our own facets and our own lanes doing everything that we can and the best that we can to push it forward, then, you know, at some point society has no choice but to hear us and listen to us. I think specifically my hope for 2021 is that I think personal healing is definitely going to be needed after everything that has, you know, this year has been a difficult time. I know people mourning the loss of employment, or mourning the loss of a loved one, or just a complete shift in dynamic. You know, I have family members that didn't even get to celebrate their graduations from high schools and colleges, or had to have babies in a room by themselves with no support. But I think my hope for 2021, hopefully we can get through this pandemic. That's my biggest hope is, you know, this vaccine comes out, people get comfortable with the research, and people do what they can to protect themselves and protect themselves for society. And I hope that we continue to educate ourselves through this, through reading, through learning. I hope we continue to be engaged. And I hope that, you know, every shot you don't take is a shot missed. So I think as long as we continue to try to do everything that we can in our own ways, and as long as we, you know, I don't think anybody should allow anything in this world, not another person, not a policy or anything, to steal your sense of joy, or to allow you to forget what you're a part of, which is a lot bigger than anything on this earth, and who ultimately will have the final say, whether you think that's God or the ancestors or the universe, whatever. And I think we need that kind of sustaining faith. So I hope that we can keep that alive in 2021 so it can keep going. And shameless plug, I hope people tune in to my podcast that I have called Black Tea. That's on all streaming platforms. It's really myself and another friend. We're both 25, and we both have like a lot of passion for politics and activism, but we feel like a lot of information that's public is often private and not unknown. So our goal is to raise political, social, and cultural consciousness, but we do it in an engaging and entertaining way.
Thank you for that plug. We will list that as a reference or resource for others to find later. Carol, what would be your wish for 21?
I have a list. I will say quickly that the National Association of Black Journalists, I'm the president of the local chapter here, that they just celebrated 45 years. And in the celebration last weekend, it was said that when they were around the table and trying to found the organization, that there were arguments, that there were disagreements, but they had a common goal and they knew that. And they walked in as colleagues and friends and they left as colleagues and friends. And so it is difficult often for us as Black people to disagree. We don't want to air our dirty laundry. And I hope for 2021 that we are able to look at each other and say, you know you're wrong, you got to do better. That we can say that to one another and say it in respect and say it in love because we have a common goal, and that is the empowerment of our ethnicity. I always say there's only one race, there's the human race, but our ethnicity as people of African descent. My husband is from the Caribbean. People that are brown and chocolate and ebony and the like. And so let us be able to argue in 2021 and point out our faults and be able to disagree and be able to grow from it. Because we know that we got some mess in our own community. We know that. And we can't be afraid to say it because white people may hear it and hold it against us. Time out for that. I don't care what they think. I care what you think. And I want you to be better because you can. And I also want a campaign to recruit Black educators who are called to be in the classroom. We need you. I know you're an accountant now. I know you're an engineer now. I know you're a business owner now. I know you're a cashier now, but you know you should be an educator. So I want that to begin to happen in 2021. I also want an increase in Black self-awareness. I also want an increase in Black worthiness. We are worthy of savings accounts. We are worthy of walking around the track at night. We are worthy of saying no to the booty call. Yes, I said it. We are worthy of a relationship that honors you and lifts you up. We are worthy of that. We are worthy of owning a business. We are worthy of owning a home. I saw a recent story where the woman said, I've rented this apartment for 12 years and nothing ever happened here. She's rented an apartment for 12 years. What happened that she didn't become a homeowner? We are worthy of success. So I want a shift in us to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, I'm worthy of more than what I have now. I'm simply worthy of more. And I would like to see Black churches tear down the silos and stop trying to be an island unto themselves and truly work together. Black churches should, and many do, should own homes. Black churches should. Black churches should ensure that their congregations have retirement accounts and savings accounts and are investing. Black churches should ensure that those things are happening, that financial stability is happening in the church. Black churches should ensure that. And personally in 2021, I want to have a birthday party. I want to celebrate my anniversary outside of this house. I want in 2021 for all of us to go on a vacation. So please wear your mask, please social distance, please get tested, please do the right thing so that we can get out of this. And one last thing, Vincent, I've turned into Dr. Suggs. Dr. Suggs. I would like to see an increase in a desire for facts. I want to see an increase in a desire for facts, a desire for information, a desire for history, a desire to read. I love music. I love jazz. I love food. I love clothes. I like shopping, but we need to read and educate ourselves. And I would love to see a desire in 2021 for that. And Dr. Cooper and to Cbabi, I love my therapist. He retired. I started going into therapy. I loved it because I love to talk anyway, but I loved it. And I plan to do more of it in 2021 so that I can be all who I'm supposed to be without the baggage and without the brokenness that we all have. I don't want to go into I'm 58, I'll be 59 next year. I don't want to turn 60 and still be crying about stuff that happened to me as a child. And so in 2021, for myself and for you, complete healing, complete healing. Thank you, Vincent.
Thank you, Carol. Michael?
Well, Vincent, the easiest thing to do would be to say everything that Carol just said. But I will add a couple more things. I want to see the political activism, the corporate statements about diversity, inclusion, and equity, the racial justice protests, and the movement about police community relations and stopping police brutality that were record numbers in the history of this nation. I want to see them continued with the same zeal that they happened in 2020. I want them to look at somebody like Dr. Donald Suggs, my mentor and my role model, and say, this is the life that I want. I'm going to take my career and I'm going to spend my entire life committed to the advancement of African Americans and others in need and work for oppressed people in this country as part of my DNA of what I'm going to do going forward. This is not a moment, it is a movement, because as soon as you think that things are going to be fine and you will be in a utopia society after Barack Obama or whoever gets elected, you'll turn right around and the Supreme Court will be 6-3 conservative to liberal justices, and you'll be living in a nation that went from Barack Obama to Donald Trump. So you can never take anything for granted. This is a lifelong struggle and it is a lifelong journey for justice. And I think about one of my favorite quotes from Nelson Mandela when he said that it always seems impossible until it is done. And so for the young people and for all of us, let us continue this fight and let it be a part of who we are and how we work between now and the chance that we have to impact generations in the future. And as long as we are on this earth, that we make a difference, give back, and help humanity.
Thank you. Valerie.
My. From my dear coach, mentor, bonus grandmother, the late Frankie Mushriman, there's still much work to be done. So we cannot give up. We cannot be at odds with one another. We must do the work. So what does the work look like? Whatever you are good at, you need to bring your talents, treasures, and time to the table. We must heal. We must understand one another. So for some of us, we need to strip naked and really do the work we need to do. So not only we help ourselves, we help others. I hope and pray for. I see my people get the opportunities that they so well deserve and have worked for. Now, I'm not saying giving you nothing, but you have worked for. I want to see political justice, not only in our community, but in the country. I want to see and hope for communities where people grow, thrive, love, and live. Communities that I grew up in this very city. We talk about the disinvestment, and we talk about it is imperative on us to bring those neighborhoods back. I am hoping that the work that I'm embarking on in 21 is real. I cannot take another day of window dressing. I cannot take another day of a plan that sounds good, but doesn't do good. So my hope is that the work to be done in 2021, we all are going to do together for the common good. So no more, since there was a reference earlier about being on the call with a bunch of old folks, that you can learn from the old, but we can learn from the young. So we all got to come together to make it happen. And we all have to be there for one another. That is my hope.
Beautiful, thank you. Dr. Suggs?
Well, of course, I'm upset because you let me speak after all these brilliant
people. So let me frame this for us then here. We're gonna also at the same time call up Chancellor Strobel and President Schuster because they still get the last word after you. So we wanna make sure that we give them ample time. So go ahead.
First thing I want to say is I'm really disappointed you let me speak after, who wants to speak after Carol, after Michael, after Valerie? But I would say that, there's 7.8 billion people in the world. And so and half of them live on less than $2 a day. So there's an enormous amount of complexity around these issues. And I would hope this kind of conversation can lead itself to where we have some study groups where we sit down and discuss, macroeconomics. You can't ignore that. I mean, that's the environment in which you're operating, however enlightened you are, however enthusiastic you are. But let me say what's heartening for me personally. Is to hear the voices of people like Dr. Cooper and Ms. Sonnier and young Ms. Jackson, to hear them talk in terms of community rather than just I. For a young woman to tell me that she has a passion for educating the young, and even at this point in my life, when you get terribly jaded and cynical, to have someone speak to me in those kinds of terms. Because if we can ever go from I to we, from I to community, if we can have not what's so happened, unfortunately, but so many African Americans who have been able to enjoy a more privileged life, is they look with disdain on their brothers and sisters who are not doing well. And we don't approve of that kind of behavior, but we have a love for those people. There's a deep love for I'm connected in that way. It's not them and us. I don't like necessarily what they do, what some of these young men do. But guess what? I got feelings for them. I got tender feelings for them, and I hope that. And I hear that in these young people. I hear that in Ms. Cooper. I want to say one thing about Ms. Cooper about these states. Missouri, as awful as it is, if you take Illinois and you take Chicago out of Illinois, you're talking about Arkansas and Mississippi. You take Georgia and you take Atlanta out of Georgia and you're talking about Mississippi. If you take New York City, you go outside New York City in New York, the state of New York, you talk about Arkansas. There's so much of America that's about that. So clearly, this is an ongoing conversation that needs to be held, broken out in groups so we can get down to some things that are more specific, because some of these things don't lend themselves just to slogans and messaging and intentions. We have to talk about how we come to remedies. And this is very encouraging me for young people. I've known some of the other people, I don't want to take anything away from them, but it's most heartening for me to hear young people speak in those terms about community, not just I. So we could just take that and build a movement around that. There's so many wonderful things we can accomplish in St. Louis. So thanks very much. I want to thank Chancellor Strobel, who has been amazing in my view, in that she's willing to take some of her considerable capital, valuable capital as a leader in this community in higher education and as a civic leader, and to use some of her capital to speak on behalf of these kind of progressive movements. She has colleagues in this community, this region, who dare not speak as she speaks. And I know that Julian is very much aligned with Dr. Strobel as well. So we have to be appreciative of what she's been willing to do and sustain it over time. And it's very encouraging that we have that kind of support from someone in a position like hers. So just thanks very much for convening this group. Thank you, Vincent. You all have been very kind. This is very heartening again. I want to shout once again, Dr. Cooper, Ms. Sonnier, and Ms. Jackson, because you all are the future, and the rest of us are here to try to be of some service and to support you when you're moving in the direction that you all have articulated here this evening. Thanks.
Thank you. I'd like to turn it over now to my partners in leadership around diversity, equity, and inclusion at Webster University, Dr. Schuster and Strobel.
So Julian, who's going to go first tonight?
All right. Thank you, Beth. Gladly. Gladly. And I think it's altogether appropriate, for you to finish the year of challenge and the year of accomplishments on behalf of the Webster University in many respects, and Webster Speaks is one of them. I will not go into the big elaboration of the things, exception being on a couple of things which caught my attention. And I think Carol Daniels said facts. And I do believe that Hannah mentioned frenzy. I do believe that Valerie mentioned where the things began. So let me start with all of that and provide my perspective how we, and I re-emphasize the thing we, not in a transactional way, but in a partnership way, and if you wish, in a combatant way, can move ahead. So, facts. It's very important when we talk about the frenzy and the facts that we remember, yes, it was a horrible regime, an internal regime, which did a lot of bad things and genocide to the internal things. But who suffer most from that regime were external people. I call our attention when we talk about the facts is a detail that in my country we didn't measure ethnicity, which was killed by Nazis. We measured the people in our neighborhood, which were annihilated by the Nazis. For all Nazis, the huge amount, not the huge, everyone who was not like them, regardless were they white or not, were called Untermenschen. And Dr. Suggs, you will directly relate to that. Untermenschen means a lower being. And I and my ancestors were lower being. Just for the fact. And that carried, not necessarily because I didn't live in Nazi Germany, that carried throughout the other part of the world which I encountered. I would like to commend, on the other hand, Mike McMillan, because Mike, now when you put your hands down, I really believe that you are in the picture, because for the moment I thought, that this is some kind of the screen that you are using, because nobody was there. So I cannot tell you, and Beth can, how many times I sent her an email message if anybody is making a huge difference on a daily basis to what we are here talking about, is not that the others are not, but there is an activity bias present in your actions. And I can tell you, Webster would be extremely happy if we can, in any form or shape, further contribute in what you are doing to change what we are all caring about. Valerie, you mentioned rightfully, not only you, but other people, you know, and I think that this is an absolute truth, that Black Lives Matters do connect with what happened in Ferguson with the killing of Michael Brown and everything else. And I would like to connect this with the thoughts of, again, Dr. Suggs. I would frame it this way. It is extremely important where we start, but it is more important where we are going to end. I do not perceive myself as an ally. I do not perceive myself as sympathetic. I perceive myself as a part of something which is very important, which can make a profound socio-economic and racial change in what we call America. So let us engage in the discussion what is the ultimate objective that we want to achieve? Not in the sense of making a little bit more money, having a little bit better position, having 3 more people in the cabinet. Dr. Suggs, you know where I'm headed. In my opinion, without fundamental change of this society, we will not be able to achieve what you deserve as African Americans to be achieved. What we, as immigrants, deserve to be achieved. Last but not least, Valerie, you mentioned, America would not be what it is without Black people. I am not going to criticize that. I'm just going to say there will be America without Black people. It would be different, profoundly different. But now, because of the experiences that Black people have, we all, who to the lesser extent experience prejudice, discrimination, elitism, have a chance to combine our efforts together through the leadership of you and through the activity of many to make America our home. Thank you.
Thank you, President Schuster. Chancellor Strobel.
Dr. Suggs, I can relate now to the discomfort of thinking that you would be the final word after the eloquence we've heard tonight. And I thank you for your commentary. This is quite a task you've set me, Vincent Flewellen, to reflect on 2020 reflections. So I suppose I'll take sort of a meta approach and talk not only about Webster Speaks tonight, but Webster Speaks across the series. So I want to begin with some gratitude. I am grateful for the people that we have seen on the screen throughout Webster Speaks, and certainly Vincent Flewellen, our host, Earl McCoy, our moderator, Julian, who has often been the person who joined me or filled in when I wasn't here. So between the two of us, I think we've been part of every single Webster Speaks. But there is a person that none of us ever sees that we should give a thank you to, and that is the producer, Marie Hickman, who does all of her work behind the scenes. And then Vincent, I think that across the series, we have had 1,400 different people tune in. That's at the heart of what I want to reflect about. So what does 2020 mean to any one of us as an individual or us collectively? It's what we make it. And I would argue that 2020 is dependent entirely on what we carry forward from it into 2021 and after. There are a lot of people that are just saying, oh, I want to close the door on 2020. I don't ever want to hear about it again. Kick that year to the curb and yoo-hoo, hooray, new year, and forget all that. We will have lost the power of 2020 if we do that. And it's up to us and our lived experiences and what sense we make of this to take 2020 and to propel us forward. As someone who's been part of organizations and communities for a long time, and really Julian talked about this as well, that's about creating things that are better, stronger, more hope-filled, more inclusive, more right for more people. I learned a long time ago that what I want to do is to get as much change and as far down the path as you possibly can, so that when the necessary and frankly realistic pushback happens, you've taken it far enough that even if it goes back, it doesn't go back to where you started. So move as far as fast as you can, but you can't do that by yourself. You have to do that with others. You go farther, it may take longer, but you go farther if you do it with a community. And so when I think about 2020, and I certainly have started to think about that, and what do I want to carry forward into 2021? I look at it from the viewpoint of an educator, and I look at it from the viewpoint of being an educator as part of the Webster University community. And there is a lot about how Webster has managed this past year that's admirable. How quickly we pivoted to serving all of our students online. You know, we had done online programming for a long time, but we moved it all there in 4 days. And we managed through all the threats to safety this fall, only having in our residence hall 12 students with infection, 12. And none of those with serious repercussions at this point. And worldwide, an incredibly small number of students that have had any infection of any type. So the strength of community has been our hallmark, caring for one another. And so, of course, when we think about Webster Speaks, and we think about Webster Speaks as one of the things that Webster committed itself to, you know, increased numbers of Suggs scholars being another, a brand new scholarship program that will be for City of St. Louis and North County residents, and many other kinds of activities that we have launched this year because we took seriously that this was a moment turning into a movement to serve real needs, to do, as Michael says, be there week after week after week doing the kinds of things that meet real human needs, and trying to figure out what it is that Webster needs to do that will cause us to be successful in educating all the students that we welcome now and into the future for a world that we think will be fundamentally different. So I have to just say that my experience of 2020 would have been fundamentally different were it not for Webster Speaks. What an amazing activity this has been. And for all of you to agree to be with us twice, thank you. It's just great. When I think about what is it that Webster Speaks has done, it has given voices to us in an easy to access way, in an engaging way that's informed us. It's challenged us. It's provoked us at moments. It's certainly engaged us and inspired us. And it has created hope for me that it is possible to have these kinds of conversations and have the staying power that our community needs for us to deliver on the promise that they put in us. We're all leaders in all of our fields and in our own ways and in our own lanes. And we need the encouragement from each other to keep going. So I want to thank you for giving me that encouragement. And I look forward to Webster Speaks in whatever form it takes, Vincent and Earl, in 2021. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chancellor Strobel, President Schuster. I really, the support that the two of you continue to give to me, to the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in helping to shape not only the work that we do at the university, but the impact that we're able to have within our St. Louis region and globally as we have that presence. I thank you very much. I thank you for entrusting me with doing this work. I really want to also thank not only Marie once more, Earl, of course, but Corinne and Patrick, who are also behind the scenes weekly on helping to make this possible. So thank you all. Of course, we want to thank all of our 2020 Webster Speaks guests. Thanks to each one of you who have also tuned in over our shows. As Chancellor Strobel said, 1,400 people have tuned into this show and generously have given over $2,500 just by that little simple button of give now. And so I thank you all for that support. Webster Speaks will be taking a break for now. However, please remember that you can view previous episodes at webster.edu/Webster Speaks. And save the date, please, for February 23rd through 25th, as we will host our annual Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Conference. In fact, it will be our 6th annual conference. This time, it will be virtual. We have an exciting lineup of presentations that will challenge the way we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Additionally, we have 2 outstanding keynote speakers, Patrice Cullors, an activist, artist, author, and co-founder of the Black Lives Matter movement, and Charlotte Clymer, a military vet, a transgender activist, and former press secretary at the Human Rights Campaign. Watch your inboxes or go to webster.edu to keep up with developments on what will be an amazing event. And if you are enjoying this virtual series, please check out our Webster World Report podcast, a special program connecting voices across Webster during the pandemic. The 18th edition will air in mid-January with President Julian Schuster discussing his views of the year ahead, the pandemic, and other important topics. The Webster World Report is available on YouTube, iTunes, and SoundCloud. For more information on the podcast, visit webster.edu. And again, thank you all for joining. See you next year. Good night. Remain well, remain safe, and have a wonderful holiday break. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Safe, everybody.